Sounds like the wheels might be in motion for Craig Counsell becoming the next manager of the New York Mets. We'll talk about it next. Kyle Lobner joins us as well. He does great work, works for the Timber Rattlers, and also you read his stuff in the Shepherd Express, the Milwaukee Record. All that coming up next here on Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day.
You are Locked On Brewers, your daily Milwaukee Brewers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yeah, it wasn't fun getting up to the news. We kind of knew it was happening, that the Brewers have granted permission to the New York Mets to talk to Craig Counsell, who's under contract to the end of the month. We'll see how that goes. Kyle will be joining us here in a little bit. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, part of Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. Download us on Google, Spotify, Apple. We're the number one Brewer podcast on the internet because of you great Brewer fans out there. And, of course, go to YouTube, our growing YouTube page. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Brewers, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and you'll get all our episodes, Locked On Brewers. We're here in the offseason with you, with great guests like Kyle Lobner from the Shepherd Express joining us. He's been covering the Brewers for a long, long time. Kyle, thanks for making your debut on the show. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you for the invitation.
News came down. What was your first impressions when you saw the tweet, saw the news this morning regarding Craig Counsell?
Well, I kind of expected that the Brewers might make the Mets wait until the last minute to be able to talk to Counsell, but I think the writing has been on the wall for a while that Counsell is interested in looking at other opportunities this winter. Isn't necessarily tied to managing next year, but certainly has his pick of the litter if he wants to look at jobs out there. And so it's a challenge for the Brewers to have somebody who's been as successful as he's been looking at other jobs. But from Counsell's perspective, I can certainly understand wanting to pursue his opportunities. And I think Pat Murphy hit the nail on the head with his comments that this is, Craig has earned the right to do this. He's earned the right to go out and enjoy free agency and see what's out there for him. And hopefully it works out for the best for everyone involved.
It just thinks that when New York wants something, they come crawling along. It's like, the national media, well, they just want to take Giannis away from the Milwaukee Bucks. They want to take this player away. They take Aaron Rodgers away. And now here, like nobody ever takes from the New York Yankees or the Mets, but they take from the Milwaukee Brewers, the small markets.
Well, sure. And I mean, it's, I'm sure at least in part the story is money here, or at least part of the story here is money, that Counsell has an opportunity to go to New York and probably be one of the higher paid managers in baseball, probably make a little more money than he was making in Milwaukee. And we'll see what they offer. And it's a challenge because for someone like Counsell, when you go to New York, you have to know it's probably not a permanent solution. You're not going to spend the next 20 years and retire there. You're probably going to spend some time as the hero, some time as the villain, some time on the hot seat, and some time out the door. But if he can go out there, work a couple of years, and put himself in a better position than he was before, then more power to him.
I would think that he could go out there, and he's got nowhere to go but up right now. I know the standards are high, but when you take over a team that has been struggling and underachieved, you have nowhere to go up. By the same token, I've also said, Kyle, on the show that if he doesn't get the job done in 2 years and isn't winning baseball games, they'll get rid of him quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I think any deal to go to New York or any market like that needs to be built around the understanding that there's a chance it doesn't go well. And anybody who signs a contract out there needs to protect themselves for that. And so I'd be surprised if you see Craig Counsell go to New York for a deal that isn't enormous and a deal that isn't guaranteed. Because you have to understand the possibility that a 5-year contract really doesn't mean anything out there, that it might be 18 months before the fans get restless and you're on your way out.
Mm-hmm. When people look from the outside on in to Craig Counsell, what do you think they see? Obviously, David Stearns knows, but what do you think the rest of the organization knows and sees what they have in Craig Counsell?
It's hard to separate Counsell from his success down the stretch with the Brewers, which has really been pretty remarkable in recent years. The Brewers have done a great job using baseball's roster rules to have a lot of success in late August and September. When the rosters expand, it seems like he's always got his finger on the right button. He's keeping guys fresh. He's keeping guys loose and active. And so this is a Brewer team that, while other teams have struggled to figure this out, has really solved the problem. And from the outside, it's impossible to know how much of that is Counsell and how much of that's the pieces he was given or, the situations he found himself in. But certainly the results correlate with his tenure here. And so it's hard to argue with that. And it'd be interesting to see if he can do that again somewhere else.
But then you look at his postseason record,
Well, sure.
Not very good, lost 9 of his last 10 games. And you look at it and you say, boy, he's done well in September. Craig Temper, as we call it, Craig Temper.
Mm-hmm.
But the postseason results have not really been there since 2018. Hasn't won a series since 2018. As I mentioned, his record, it's a losing record of the postseason.
Yeah, I think, this is the challenge of evaluating a manager, is that we don't know if Craig Counsell is the reason the Brewers have been so good in September. We also don't know if he's the reason they haven't been very good in October. And there have been entire books written about this very topic, trying to figure out what it is exactly that a manager controls and what they don't. But at a bare minimum, Craig Counsell has been at the head of a lot of teams that have had an opportunity to compete in October. They haven't gotten the job done. And certainly if he goes to New York and has this same kind of run where they get bumped early in the playoffs 3 years in a row, I think you'll see it on a much bigger stage out there. But it's, certainly credit to him for the things that have gone well. And whether you want to weigh those against the things he struggled with is really a matter of individual perception.
Kyle Lobner joining us, been covering the Brewers a long time. Shepherd Express, Milwaukee Record, works for the Timber Rattlers as well. And you read his stuff, good stuff. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I always walk a fine line when I talk about managers. I always believe it's more about the Jimmies and the Joes than the X's and O's. I mean, you get the talent out there, but he hasn't had a lot of talent in Milwaukee. And one game. Certainly there are teams with more talent out there that haven't got the job done.
Yeah, I think the Brewer teams under Counsell that have done well have done it with depth more than they've done it with stars, with the possible exception of Christian Yelich's 2-year run, where he was probably the best player in baseball. And that's a real skill. Now, does it transfer over to a major market and the salaries and personalities that come with that? That's an interesting question. That may be something we find out soon. But certainly at a bare minimum, Craig Counsell has demonstrated the ability to keep a roster with 25 to 30 contributors healthy and effective through a full season. And that's something that I think would serve him well in a variety of jobs. I just don't particularly know if it's the Mets job.
Well, let's face it, if he goes to the New York Mets and the Mets ask for permission today to talk to Counsell, if he goes there, there's a better chance for him to win. There's a better opportunity. They can go out and get themselves who they want, when they want. And with Mark Attanasio, you're just not going to get that in Milwaukee.
No, I think that's definitely true. But I think that the flip side of that is that if Counsell is interested in listening to offers from jobs out there around the baseball landscape, I think I'd be more interested in the Padres job than the Mets job. The Padres have the kind of depth of star power that I think Counsell would be well equipped to manage. They don't have the intense scrutiny of the New York market. They do have expectations clearly, and there's some questions about their front office and how it interacts with the manager's office. But I think there are better opportunities for Craig Counsell to go out there and win at other jobs. The New York job is just the highest profile and probably the highest salary opening.
Yeah, I mean, if you want the pressure and all that, and the media maybe out there, it's more of a sports radio media than the print media used to be for them because of where the newspaper business has gone, especially out in New York with the elimination of some of those newspapers. But in San Diego, the Padres lose. It's like, the Mets lose or go on a run there, and it's all over WFAN out there.
Right. Yeah, and it's just a different atmosphere around the sport. It's a different level of pressure, and you become a different kind of hero if you win in New York. But history suggests that it's a relatively rare breed that can do that.
I'm wondering, though, and you mentioned money, and I agree. If, let's say the Mets offer this, say they offer $5-6 million, and Attanasio comes back and says, okay, I'm going to give you this. If it really is about that, or is it about a chance to really do more with the resources out there?
Yeah, and that's a question that only Craig Counsell can answer, and obviously he's not interested in answering it right now. But I think, I'd be surprised if it's not some of both. I would, as you look at teams that are out there, I don't think it's any secret that there are a handful of MLB franchises right now that are kind of all in on winning. And then others that have budget constraints. There's only a small handful of jobs out there where I feel like the primary responsibility right now is to go out and win. And so when you get an opportunity to have one like that in New York, that's a relatively rare breed. Although, again, San Diego would be a similar one. You
know how it works when one of our guys goes to the competition? Paul Molitor, 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago to the date, in December it'll be, went to the Toronto Blue Jays, and when he came back, the fans booed him. Do you think if he goes to the Mets and when Counsell comes out and delivers that pregame lineup at home plate at AmFam Field, kind of reception do you think you get?
I would hope it would be positive, but I think a lot of it would depend on how the next month goes down. If Craig Counsell goes to New York and says, I came here because I wanted to win a World Series and it wasn't happening in Milwaukee. Yeah, that first time he comes to Milwaukee, he's going to get booed. If he goes out to New York and he says, you know what, this is the best opportunity for me and my family. It was a tough decision. I enjoyed my time in Milwaukee, but this is the next step for me. I would hope that people will appreciate that. I would hope that this is kind of the measuring stick of what kind of fan you are. When someone has entertained you for a long time, they've brought lots of happiness to you over the years. Do you want them to go out and do what's best for them? Do you want them to go out and get paid? Do you want them to go out and pursue an opportunity? Or do you want them to stay? And do what's maybe not in their best interest, just for your best interest. And I would hope that Brewer fans will recognize that if Craig Counsell goes to New York, as long as he's not a jerk on the way out the door, that it's not a sign that he didn't appreciate what he had here. It's just time for him to do something new.
Yeah, and I think he will go out the door, if he does go out the door, with his taking the high road, being the good guy. Not like Tom Crean, who, I mean, right? If you looked at it, when he left Marquette to go to Indiana, he left the Post-it note saying, I'm gone, guys. And next thing you know, he's at Indiana. And you can understand now they've patched it up since then. But certainly that way, Brett Favre leaving, that way, same thing in some of his comments. But yeah, if Counsell goes out in the press conference says, you know what, I really love my time in Milwaukee, my heart will be forever there, and says all the things that we like to hear.
And I'd be surprised if he doesn't say that. I mean, that's by all accounts, this has been a really great fit for Craig Counsell for a long time. And if it's not anymore, it's perhaps fair to ask the question about why it wasn't. But I think, there's a lot of folks who should have nothing but positive thoughts for Craig Counsell on his way out the door.
All right, we're going to come right back, talk more with Kyle Lobner from the Shepherd Express, Milwaukee Record, works for the Timber Rattlers as well. Chuck Freeman here, Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're going to talk to him. We're going to talk to him about who would be Craig Counsell's replacement if he goes to New York. He's not there yet, but if he does, of course, by the time this episode does, and who knows, reports are out there that he went to New York. But we'll get to that coming up here in a little bit. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, part of Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. And joining us, as always, as a great sponsor, the people over at Jase. The Jase case is a personalized medical medication kit that contains 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. You can also customize your case and add additional life-saving medications based on your unique needs. Jase now offers customize your Jase case with dozens of add-on medications. Choose the medications and the best fit for you and your family's unique need. They're always working for your needs over at the Jase case. Gift cards available. That's another thing you need to look at with the holidays coming up. Go to Jase case, Jase medical.com. Enter the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for $20 off the discount of your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON, Jase medical.com, Jase Case Medical. You can't predict the future, but you don't want to be called or be unprepared. You don't want to be unprepared. There are certain things that can happen in the world, your family and all that. You don't want to be unprepared when the time comes. The Jase case is there for you. Again, a personalized emergency medical kit that contains the 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. And again, you get all this by going to jasemedical.com. Enter the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout, $20 off your discount. Go to Jase Case. You see it if you're watching me on YouTube, jasemedical.com. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. We're coming right back and talking more with Kyle Lobner next here on Locked On Brewers. Welcome back to Locked On Brewers. Chuck Freeman here. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You're downloading us on YouTube, subscribing to us on YouTube, or going to our various downloads. Go to Google, Spotify, Apple. We're on all the major downloads. Follow us on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, Chuck Freeman, Freimund. Follow Kyle on Twitter, by Kyle Lobner. You know how to spell Kyle. Go by Kyle Lobner. Lobner. That's Lobner. Kyle Lobner. All right. So let's say he goes to New York. Couple of ideas you have for a manager?
I hadn't thought a ton about it yet, and I'm curious to see with the turnover the Brewers have had in their front office, with the transition from David Stearns to Matt Arnold. I think it'll be very interesting to see if the Brewers look at internal candidates for this job, or if Matt Arnold has somebody out there that he's got his eye on. There's a guy here in the organization that we talked a little bit about in the final weeks of the season that I would really love to see an opportunity at the big league level, a guy who I worked with for a long time at the Timber Rattlers, and Matt Erickson. Who has managed in the minors for a long time. He's worked, with the big league team. He was on the big league coaching staff 2 years ago. He went back and forth between the big leagues and the minors this last year. Has a ton of experience with guys the Brewers have developed internally. I would hope that he will at least get an opportunity to interview for the job if the Brewers are looking for somebody else. But beyond that, there's a big open field out there. And I think we're going to learn a little bit about Matt Arnold in the months ahead as we see if he, values the opportunity to bring in an internal candidate here, or if he's got somebody else he wants to look at.
Do you see Matt Erickson as a guy who maybe needs to move up to AA or AAA at all to get a step closer to Major League Baseball?
No, I don't think so. I think that the volume of experience that he has accumulated managing in the minors is significant. That's not the traditional path to being a big league manager anymore. It's usually coaching on a big league coaching staff, or frankly, a lot of guys who are coming relatively short after playing now. But I do think that the experience level is there. I think he has seen both the big league side and the minor league side of it, has a lot of experience with organizational philosophy, would know a lot of the guys the Brewers are bringing up as prospects come up in the next few years. And so for my money, he'd be a great fit, but I'm certainly open to hearing what else is out there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Some of these, Craig had very limited front office experience. He was there for like a couple of days.
No coaching experience.
No, but they right to the front of the line, right? And some of these guys too, and some of the candidates that you hear out for in San Diego or even Milwaukee or New York, guys are just off the playing field.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like that's the trend in recent years, and I'll be curious to see if that changes now as the sports statistical analysis movement becomes a little more entrenched. Because for a while, it seemed like guys who were younger were getting these jobs, at least in part because they were more likely to be well versed in the way the game is played right now.
Yeah.
And the statistical revolution has slowed a little bit. The stat heads kind of won the stats versus scouts argument. It's more of a balance now. And so there's more guys out there who have both experience in the statistical movement. And so I don't know if you'll see some of the guys who a generation ago got passed over, guys who are about that age now start to get jobs.
Kyle Lobner joining us from Shepherd Express, covers the Brewers. Also Milwaukee Record, longtime writer covering our favorite baseball team. Chuck Freeman here on Locked On Brewers. Let's turn the page a little bit. 92 wins, 27 hours in the postseason. How can they get over the hump? What do you think they need to do to take this extra step?
Well, I think there's a few things you have to remember from this year's Brewers team. And the first one that surprised me, it snuck up on me until people started to talk about it when the Brewers were eliminated from the playoffs, that this was the fifth best team in baseball this year. This wasn't a year with a lot of dominant teams, and the best teams were all escorted from the postseason relatively quickly. But this was, I think, a more successful year in general than a lot of people will give it credit for. Now, there were certainly some frustrating moments in here. There were some stretches where this team didn't look real great, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But I think it's been a better year than maybe I would have anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at the teams that have been successful this October, and the Rangers and Diamondbacks both fit this model, they've brought up young guys to fill in holes on this team, but it's not just that they've brought them up, they've empowered them. They've trusted them and let them play. I look at the Diamondbacks and Brandon Pfaadt, who has played just a ton of key innings, started playoff series game 1, for the Diamondbacks. I don't know that that's a thing the Brewers would have done. Letting a guy who had been up and down from the minors that very year start game 1 of a playoff series. And so I think for all the talk the Brewers have had, and for all the talk the Brewers have put out there, frankly, about the guys they're bringing up and how excited they are about their young guys, I think it might be time to let some of these guys play. And to really, unleash them a little bit, let them get in there every day, give them an opportunity to show what they can do. Because I think the alternative is to do what the Phillies did and really buy pieces and try to fill in the gaps. And I don't think the Brewers are in the budget realm to try to consider that.
Although the Brewers with Weimer, I mean, he was out there every day at center field, and they let Frelick play for the most part against except for left-handers. They didn't let him play. But I thought they let a lot of the young guys, and Bryce Terang too, until they just figured out that he had to get sent down and rework that stroke a little bit.
Well, and every single player you just mentioned there they let him play until they let Weimer run for a little while. Then they left him sit on the bench for a long time.
Yeah.
And then when he came back out, he looked like he was lost. They let Frelick play except for against lefties for a while until they needed him to. And then they discovered he could do it. Terang has had the same, they just were trumpeting him as a Gold Glove candidate. He played about 400 innings less out there than the guys who are going to win the award. It's time to see what you've got with these guys. And if you limit them to, occasional at bats, or if you limit them to 80 games, or if you don't give them an opportunity to grow, they're not going to grow. And so I hope that next season, the Brewers will find some opportunities to really let these guys run and see what they can do, because I think the teams that are competing right now to be the champion of the season are pretty clear demonstrations that when you do that and it goes well, you can build a championship caliber team.
Who are one of the two young guys that you want to see that you feel like the Brewers are not letting go?
I really would have liked to have seen Joey Weimer get more consistent playing time through this season. And I know that he struggled at times down the stretch. I know that he struggled in kind of part-time duty. But defensively, I think he's a guy who is a difference maker for this team. And having seen him play in the minors, having seen that power in person, I think that plays at the big league level. But it's always going to be a little bit of a challenge for him to stay right. He's a guy that's going to need to stay in rhythm. He's a guy who's going to need to get consistent at bats to be able to stay at that level. And so Weimer is a guy that I would think about right away on that list. But then, in the infield, we talked about Bryce Terang. I think Terang offers a lot to this team. I think he may have to play a lot by necessity if the Brewers decide not to stick with Willy Adames. But he's a guy I'd really like to see out there more often. And then when you look around the organization, they're going to have to make a decision pretty soon on what to do with Jackson Chourio, who comes in. He probably plays a similar position to what Sal Frelick plays. He plays a similar position to what Garrett Mitchell plays. They're going to have to figure out which of these guys they want out there, because mixing and matching may not be the best fit for any of them.
Well, that's a good problem to have. They have so many young guys in that crowded outfield spot. You mentioned Weimer, Chourio, if he makes the team next year, Frelick. I mean, you got Tyrone Taylor, if you still want to call him a young guy. I mean, you throw all these guys out there, and somebody's going to have to sit, or somebody's going to have to go.
Yeah, absolutely. But if we had talked about this
Mitchell?
At this time, and Mitchell also, if we had talked about this at this time this spring, I think I wrote about the Brewers not having enough playing time for all their guys in the outfield this spring. And then between injuries and ineffectiveness, Blake Perkins got 70 games out there anyway. And so it's one of those things that sometimes this tends to solve itself because, guys do get hurt or guys get moved or whatever else may happen. But yeah, the Brewers are going to have a lot of guys, and they need to determine which ones they're going to make a commitment to and which ones they may want to seek value for elsewhere.
All right, we're talking to Kyle Lobner. Kyle, before I let you go, do you see this being one of those very active off seasons once we get by whether or not Craig is going to be the manager or not? We know they're not going to be a heavy player in free agency. They got the non-tenders coming up, but do you see this being a very busy team trying to rework these guys?
I think if it's a busy off season, then it may very well be a selling off season, because I think the most likely big moves this Brewers team may make involve Corbin Burns, involve Willy Adames, it involves some guys who you may consider moving elsewhere, as opposed to guys you consider adding. I'd love to be surprised. I'd love to see the Brewers, make some big offers to guys who are out there, and maybe try to make a splash in free agency, or, make a move like the Greinke trade from a decade ago. But I think if this Brewer team is a big player in the market, it's most likely going to be listening to offers to kind of retool, more than to add pieces.
Hey, Kyle, thanks for stopping on, making some time out, carving some time out for us. It was good to get you aboard.
Hey, my pleasure.
That's Kyle Lobner. He does a great job. Read his stuff. Shepherd Express, longtime employee of the Timber Rattlers as well. Milwaukee record. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. You can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Join FanDuel today. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to create your new account. Get on all the action from the first pitch to the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs and who will win the game. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Get those $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Chuck Freeman here on Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're coming right back after this timeout. It's going to do it for the show today. Thanks to Kyle Lobner for stopping by on our show, giving us some great information. We'll keep you posted on what's going on with Craig Counsell. Is he staying or is he going? Is he becoming a New York Met or is he going to stay right here? Get a big offseason planned. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. So long, everybody.